This 0 to Hero is going to be on the Chronos server with my already established account, so that means I already have Legion and Lynx. But other than that, my goal here is to keep things as low budget and as, let's just say, terribly geared as possible. I also won't be using any guild buffs, and I won't be using anywhere near the amount of buffs that are actually available to my character, only some of the easiest ones to obtain. And I'm a Terror Burn, so I will have fake CRA. So the first meaningful progression thing you get in a character's journey is at level 50 you get the Inner Ability, which now starts at the Epic Rarity. I also saved a legendary circulator from the previous event just for Lynn. There's also usually always some kind of event going on that offers these as a reward. Not that I would recommend spending precious event currency on them. Events also usually offer a lot of medals of honor in various different ways, and if your main characters don't need them, then you can easily spend them on alts like this to give them a pretty early boost in power. Now I'm not going to go over anything crazy. This is already better than a level 50 would normally have, so I'm going to stick with it. And for a while after that, it is just leveling. Not much to do for progression until you're in the hundreds. You could be doing Afterlands, and I recommend that you do Afterlands while you're leveling because it just makes more sense. But since it makes sense, that means I won't be doing it on time. I'm going to purposely delay it. And as Terror Burn characters do, I get Frozen Gear at level 100, and of course I'm going to Starforce it, that way I can take advantage of Starforce leveling zones if I so choose. I also have an Android event from the previous event, but it is just a basic Lydium heart, and that really doesn't offer many stats. It's just something to fill an otherwise empty slot. I also realized afterward that I forgot about the frozen weapon. So now it's time for the emblem, a piece that I typically upgrade quite a lot the moment I hit 100. Now normally you would use just a regular potential scroll accompanied with hundreds of mystical cubes since an emblem is so cheap to re-roll. Then once it actually gets epic potential, you can still use hundreds of mystical cubes to get a really good epic potential on a budget, or you can use better cubes like bright cubes to try to go all the way up to legendary, which is what I typically do. I normally do the same thing with the secondary as well, especially if I get a frozen secondary from a Terror Burn or something. But given that the emblem isn't replaced all the way until endgame, I would do that one first. So if you're going to take one of them to legendary or unique or whatever, do the emblem first. I'm certainly not going to sit here with a ton of cubes just waiting to go to legendary. I'm going to just end up sticking on a unique one for now that has good enough stats for a leveling character. On a level 100 character, you would normally only be doing your frozen secondary or even a regular secondary with mystical cubes, just trying to get a really solid epic potential. It's very cheap and effective, the only downside being it takes a lot of time to throw that many mystical cubes at something. And since I'm trying to keep things really reasonable, probably just gonna stick here for now. So with that little burst of gear being done, it's time to get some leveling in, although I forgot something. I forgot to do Zakum at 100. I certainly don't need the power, but having those extra items to Starforce can be a really huge deal when you're trying to level in Starforce zones. And remember that if you're really trying to rush through and get as geared as possible, bring drop rate coupons, at the very least a 50% Legion coupon. Even with 150% drop rate, I only got one of the accessories, but it's not a big deal. We're going to be taking down Czak the moment we're able to. And of course, being a Terra or Hyperburn character at 150, you have access to fake CRA gear. Now, if you're doing this on a non-burning character, you can of course just Starforce your 140 gear, especially the overall and the hat, and just transfer hammer it into your real CRA. Transfer hammer is going to retain most of the value you invest into it, and the good news is your 140 gear can already come with a potential, saving you a potential scroll. So with my fake CRA equipped, it's time to get back to leveling so we can get to the next level where we start doing more bosses for progression, and that's going to be around 180. The first boss you're going to start off with is Chaos Horntail. He's the easiest boss to kill out of all of these bosses, and he also has the most drops. Horntail's drops, being the Chaos Horntail pendant, the earrings, and the ring, can stay with you for an uncomfortably long period of time. The great news being is that all three of those items can be turned into drop rate or meso gear. The base power of them doesn't really matter for those sets, especially if your gear is really good elsewhere. So if you want to take these to legendary, it's really not a bad idea. Unfortunately for me, I did not get all three drops, but 2 out of 3 ain't so bad. This is also being done only a couple hours before server reset though, so another chance of Horntail drops is really not that far away from me. Which is really good news because Pink Bean is a much more stingy boss. It's very rare to get exactly what you need from Pink Bean. Honestly, it's very rare to get anything at all. And of course, in true Pink Bean fashion, I get nothing. Typically, if you want to go right into our Carium, you might want to upgrade your gear at least a little bit. Don't save it all for the end. Now, given that Horntail is a daily boss with a relatively good drop rate on his gear, it's generally a good idea to wait until one with potential drops already. The same thing also goes for our Carium's Machinator pendant. Given that it's 100% drop rate, or I've never not seen one drop, it's, just wait for one with potential, or even a good flame if you want. Sometimes these things drop with absolutely insane flames already on them. Typically, I just cube and flame the one that drops the very first time I kill him. And sometimes when you're really lucky, you can also get a Dominator pendant that first time. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those people right now. Now my pendant dropped with a pretty bad flame, so I'm just gonna throw some things at it and just settle on something that is good enough, like that. And of course, as usual, gonna throw some Star Force on it. I go a little bit overboard on this one, not paying attention, gonna take it all the way up to 14, but normally you would just stop at like 10. And just like I mentioned earlier with the emblem, normally I would go pretty hard into a Machinator pendant. I'm typically going to be wearing these things until I have both a Dominator pendant and a Superior Gollix. And even after you have those, it can just graduate into drop rate or meso gear. So here I'm just trying to Star Force some pieces of gear to try to get closer to the Star Force requirements and level in this map. Eventually, it doesn't work out because I'm not in a guild and I don't have that big old boost of Star Force, but whatever, I go back to leveling and I get to 200. Now is when some of the real progression starts. Typically, you might have some nodes to level up, especially if you have a main that is over level 260 or so. I'm not going to open any on that, which is pretty sad because Lynn is insanely good at getting the nodes she needs. I have never played an easier character. I don't know about you guys, but I've just seen too many videos of people saying like Lotus and Damien with 4K stats, but then they open their node page and they have level 25 in every node already. Too often there's just some major caveat that is not in the title, but I promise you that if you do the things that I'm doing in the proper order and to a good level, you will do a lot better than this character is doing, especially with a top tier class. And that's even if you have like half of the Legion I have. I'm also not even taking advantage of events like this where I could be claiming all of these rewards as well as like 1200 nodes from my storage. In any case, after doing the 5th job stuff, it's time to get back into the bosses. Now, as I said before, I forgot to do Magnus. Normally I would try to do him just before Carium, but really it doesn't matter when you do him as long as it's before the weekly bosses. So Magnus down and I at least get the shoulder, which is the better one to get. The badge, you know, is great, but the shoulder is actually potable. And now with the shoulder, there are a lot of different boss pieces that actually need to be upgraded at this point that I've been putting off. And the way that is going to be done primarily is with a ton of mystical cubes. Now it can take a couple hundred to upgrade from rare to epic, which is a lot, and it will save you some money, but it will also take a lot of time to do it. So if you have the means to instead buy some cubes from a vendor or just have a boss meal to supply you with some of the green and purple cubes, you can use those instead. Obviously, that does cost a little bit more money if you consider the cube's value, but it saves you a ton of time. But as you can see with the results, about 500 cubes later and less than 15 mil, now all these boss items I have epic potential with at least one line. Now if there were Decidus earrings from Chaos Horntail in the mix, the meso cost would have gone up considerably because cubing those with mystical cubes costs over 10 times more meso than these other items. And as with any new character, it's time to start preparing for Chaos Rouge Abyss. And since Maplestory patches go live usually just before weekly boss reset, that means I'm going to be able to get things like Zakum and stuff in, even though I can't do Rouge Abyss for obvious reasons. This character was freshly created. As a fresh character, buffing is going to be pretty important if you want a really smooth experience, and I do have a handful of buffs in the top right. I have both Monster Park buffs, Legion buff, Fame buff, and a VIP buff from the current event. Tons of easy buffs are left on the table: Guild Blessings, Noblesse skills, Ursus buff, and many more, all of which I covered in my buff video, which you can find on my channel. As you can see, it's not going to be the fastest kill in the world, but you can easily kill Chaos Zakum on a freshly level 200 character. A 5-minute kill for a really weak solo class like Lynn is a pretty damn solid time, and as you will see later, there is a huge mistake that I made completely unintentionally, but made things like this way more challenging than it needed to be, especially even the leveling. In any case, Chaos Zakum gave me the other accessory, which is great because I didn't get it from normal Zakum. However, unintentionally, I'm actually just gonna forget to equip it. And from there, gonna go right into Chaos Pink Bean, the next boss in the progression, hoping to get the Golden Clover Belt as well as my pocket item. A Black Bean Mark would be fantastic, but hoping for that on your first kill, yeah, probably not gonna happen, especially when, like me, you forget to bring drop buffs. The one thing that earlier in this video I said you should remember to do. I didn't do it. Well, actually, I did remember to do them. Worse, I just forgot to use them. Perhaps if I had, I actually would have gotten a Golden Clover Belt because it has a pretty high drop rate. When you have drop rate gear, it's pretty much guaranteed, but at least I get the cup. Now on to Hard Magnus to get hopefully the badge that will drop from Hard Magnus. Again, pretty much a guaranteed drop on hard difficulty, as well as the Tyrant Cape, which is also, in my experience, a 100% drop rate. And of course, I get both, as I expected. I also get a belt, which is great if you're like me and you haven't gotten a belt from Czak or Pink Bean yet. You won't invest anything into this belt, but at least it's not an empty gear slot like you have had up until this point, most likely. Tyrant Cape is just a huge upgrade without anything, and luckily this one came with a pretty decent flame built in, which we're probably just going to keep. You're typically not going to have a Tyrant Cape for very long, so there's not a lot of point in investing a lot into it. Usually the most I do to it is take it to Epic and make sure it's got a flame at about the level this one dropped at. Right here is also when I realized I didn't even equip this yet. Not that it would have made a big difference or that Magnus was even a struggle, but again, every little bit of everything helps, even though I'm trying to upgrade things in bulk anyway just to make footage a little bit easier to find. Normally right here after Hard Magnus is when I would go right into Princess No, but at this point I had forgotten that they'd actually removed the pre-quest for Pino. I was really just concerned about getting everything done before daily reset, including stuff on my main that I was putting off. Now we are in day 2, reset has just happened, and the first thing I need to do is get a trait boost potion, that way I can actually use my pink bean cup. Get the charm to level 30, equip the cup, realize, oh, I needed to flame it first, get a good flame on it, because again, you're going to be having this thing until whenever you start doing hard will, if ever. So make sure you give it a good flame, and also make sure you get a second one and keep making them play flame leapfrog with each other. Really no need to waste black flames on them. And now it's time to start adding potential to some of those boss drops we got from the weekly bosses, things like the Tyrant Cape, the second Zakum accessory. Now for an item like Tyrant Cape, this is when mystical cubes become a lot less efficient because every time you cube it, it costs 450,000 meso to cube it. So when you're trying to tier it up to epic, it's actually a little bit more cost effective on average. Just go with the hard cubes. If you're like me and you have a ton of boss mules, you likely get a bunch of these things every week that you're just looking for a reason to use. And building a boss mule entirely with those is a pretty good idea. And earlier I had mentioned that there was something big that I was missing, and I never had mentioned hyperstats up to this point because I completely forgot to put them in. I was so focused on leveling fast, beating the weekly reset, getting everything done on time that I forgot about one of the biggest sources of power. At this point, this is practically becoming a what not to do. In any case, eventually I finally did Afterlands. Normally you would try to do this even before Chaos Horntail, and then I did the NLC story ring, again, something you would do even before Horntail. At least these two I delayed on purpose. In any case, it's a whole new week and a whole new day, and it's time to slaughter all the bosses again to see if I can get what I missed. And I forgot drop coupons again for Princess No Kill. Pink Bean actually gives me the Golden Clover belt, and even after a long 2 days of grinding him, still no Dominator pendant from our Carium. And now it is time to upgrade the new drops, that being the Chaos Horntail earrings, the Golden Clover belt, and the NLC Treasure Hunter John's ring, which if you're a newer player and you don't have a bunch of potential scrolls ready to use, what you should do is keep doing Chaos Horntail, wait till you get a duplicate ring with potential on it, mystical cube that ring up to epic, and then transfer hammer it into the Treasure Hunter John's. Now for the Golden Clover belt, this is an item that you would actually take to 17 stars if you had the budget. Normally I would do that too, but I'm not going to do that for the purpose of just showing a more realistic example. Then after the star forcing is done, it is time to start cubing, and I get incredibly lucky with the Treasure Hunter John's ring and it just goes right to unique. Rings can be a very difficult gear slot to fill out without the help of event rings, so normally I have no problem taking even something like the Treasure Hunter John's ring, the Horntail ring, all the way up to legendary potential, because once again, those things can just graduate into drop or meso gear later. Then after getting 6% int or better in one case, now it's time to equip all my new upgraded pieces. And with that, at least most of the gear slots are filled with something, even though some of the pieces are kind of crap. And my stat is all the way up to 7k, which isn't too bad for just 2 days in, and this is the start of the second day. Not that there's a whole lot to be done anymore. There is still some work to be done on the gear though. Both the Golden Clover belt and the Horntail earrings are capable of getting flame advantage, so it is worthwhile to flame them, even though one of those will be replaced. It could be replaced very quickly depending on your superior Gollick's luck. Also, I completely forgot to upgrade the Zai accessory this whole time. It's just kind of been sitting there, basically just filling out the boss set. Like I said, mistake after mistake after mistake, but that's fine, because at least it shows that you can mess up a lot of things and you can still do pretty well, even with a class that is definitely going to end up on the weaker side, just based off how Beast Tamer was solo. Also at this point, I'm going to put a little bit more work into my secondary, because again, I'm not going to count on getting Princess No, and I usually just like to have 2 anyway. Maybe one for mobbing, one for bossing, or I just have 2 upgraded, maybe one that gets like magic attack, maybe another has a bunch of IED. It's not exactly something that I would recommend others to do. It's just something that I do because I'm really impatient when it comes to gearing new characters like this, and I don't want to wait 2 to 3 weeks to get a Princess No secondary. I also sometimes make sure my fake CRA has some relatively good flames and potentials on it. At least 6% lines, because that's easy to get. Flames, I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that, but again, I normally have a bunch of expiring red flames from boss mules. So the stats aren't looking too bad, and as I said before, I'm not really doing nodes. I opened like 15 expiring ones, but as you can see, I didn't even do anything with them. I didn't even put in my matrix points. Still didn't claim a bunch of stuff I could have. So skipping ahead to day 4 now, I've been doing my dailies every day, my Rouge Abyss every day, and I've also been doing some minor leveling just through the dailies and capping my event coins. Having already done the weekly bosses, it's now time to work a little bit on my secondary and emblem. I think I've proven that some of those early bosses can be done with some pretty jank gear, so now it's time to at least put a little bit into this. Maybe get some ignore enemy defense because it's a little bit on the lower side. Ultimately, I'm just going to take whatever is good enough that comes quick enough because I'm trying to spend as little money as possible, and this is definitely good enough. Of course I'm going to keep that. I'd probably keep that if I was intending on spending like another 4 bill. Like, that's good enough for me. It's got 2-line magic attack and a 3rd line that's useful. This one, on the other hand, kind of the inverse of the last one, and maybe I'll see if I can get an upgrade from that, but honestly, I'm okay with settling that one too. And like 7 cubes later, I get a potential that, yeah, that's definitely good enough as well. I didn't have to spend much on either of these combined. I got pretty lucky, and honestly, even if I wasn't trying to keep the budget down to a horrific minimum, I would probably settle on those and just put my money elsewhere. At this point, I figured, you know, I did open like 15 nodes. I may as well just see if I have some good try nodes in there, because Lynn is literally like the easiest character in the game to get try nodes for. It's honestly a shame that I'm putting a limitation on her of just not opening nodes, because like 150 nodes would go so far on her, as opposed to like a class like Dual Blade, or you can open 150 and get nothing. Skip ahead a couple of days and I finally have Chaos Rouge Abyss unlocked, so it is time to do those bosses. Inner ability is still junk, nodes are still non-existent, no decent sharp eyes, no decent speed infusion, no good levels on my boost nodes that are criminally easy to get. Really just trying to go in as unprepared as possible while still technically being prepared. So I'm gonna drink an IED potion, which I didn't do for the other weekly bosses because Rouge Abyss at least deserves a little bit more respect. Do the usual buffs, Monster Park, Legion buff. I'm even doing Ursus buff this time, and I am in a guild. It's my own guild. It's a little baby guild. It was made like a couple days before this, and it has like almost no buffs. I'm not going to use the buffs it even does have because I'm just trying to show things that everyone can get. Maybe not everyone can get in a guild, even though it is pretty easy. In any case, you also fame somebody outside Zakum, preferably level 275. They are everywhere. And now it's actually time to do Rouge Abyss. So here's my gear again. My symbols, decently leveled. One thing I forgot to mention is that for all the bosses you've seen before this, I had a pendant of the spirit equipped. So this time I'm actually putting on the Chaos Horntail pendant, which is completely unupgraded, but at least it gives stats unlike the pendant of the spirit. I actually came into this expecting these boss fights to be a slog, but immediately I'm doing a lot more damage to Von Bon than I expected. Now, of course, having fake Rouge Abyss helps a lot. That gives you a lot of boss damage, a lot of stats that normally you would otherwise not have at this point. But I've made a lot of boss mules with and without fake CRA, and this one was pretty damn quick. But I made one of the biggest mistakes you can make on a boss mule. I forgot the drop rate coupons. Again, I had them, I just forgot to click them. And for the second time ever out of 20 characters or more, I got less than 5 drops. My initial plan was to show you how I normally get every individual piece of real Rouge Abyss as I'm going through these bosses, and I upgrade each one to make the next boss easier than the last. But since I'm not going to get the full set, I'm saying screw that, and I'm doing the entire real Rouge Abyss with the gear I have on. I'm not changing anything. So once again, this time a Crimson Queen, a very quick fight all things considered. 2 minutes, not too bad for a brand new character with, again, jank gear. This time I remembered to use a drop rate buff, and that means there is no worry of getting less than 5 drops. So of course I'm going to get the piece of gear from her, but again, just not happening this week. I'm going to do it all at once next week. Pierre is usually the boss you save for last, save for Vellum, obviously. Pierre is mechanically intensive and requires a lot of burst damage to cheese some of the more annoying parts of his fight. And Lynn is a class almost entirely devoid of burst damage. And after a very sloppy Pierre fight that you thankfully didn't have to witness, Pierre is down and it's time to move on to Vellum. Vellum is the first real test any boss mule has to go through, and arguably a non-essential one. A lot of people skip the real Rouge Abyss weapon and just go straight to Absolab, either through carries, parties, or they just use the fake Salab until they get the real Absolab weapon. I, however, unless I'm doing a hyperburn, I like to get the real thing. And once again, surprisingly, even though the first 3 bosses went down really easy, I expected a little bit more of a fight from Vellum, but it's looking like it's going to be a 5-minute kill, which again is really good for a class like Lynn. And then with my leftover buffs, again without changing my gear at all, I decided let's go try Lotus. And I wasn't really intending on actually doing this, I just wanted to see how much damage I could do. And 2 minutes for this much damage in the first phase is not exactly ideal looking, but I think this would be possible, especially if I actually popped my guild crit damage buff. If I was gonna seriously do Damien and Lotus at this point, I would probably use some nodes on this character, at least like 50 to 100. But right now that's not gonna happen. I do really enjoy Lynn. Lynn is a fantastic class, especially if you plan on dueling with people. I just don't think I'm going to take my Lynn into Absolab gear. It's probably gonna stay in Rouge Abyss, and I probably won't really play it as a boss mule. Fast forward to day 9 of Lynn's existence, I did come back to do Rouge Abyss the second time after this week's weekly reset. The only thing that changed at this point was my inner ability, which is still crap, and obviously I have more symbol levels as well as one more character level. I somehow even had a even more sloppy Pierre this week, ended up having to reset the fight. It was totally the bird's fault, by the way. I could have turned it off, but I'm blaming the bird anyway. In any case, Pierre died, Crimson Queen died, and of course then Vellum again. And with that, my Lynn has real Rouge Abyss. At this point, you would start doing hard lucks. If you know the mechanics, you would do Helix. And of course, you would add Damien and Lotus to your boss list. There are tons of other things you would start to do in progression at this point, but again, I'm not going to do them on my Lynn. This is where my Lynn's journey ends. For the next month or so, I'm likely going to keep playing the Lynn, if only just to cap event coins to buy things for my main. Now, if you would like to see what I did with this video, but with much less mistakes, ideally none, and actually putting a lot of effort into trying to maximize the character, then when the Hyperburn comes out in Dreamer, I'm probably going to do this exact same thing again with my Hyperburn from a fresh start, level 0 character, and I will actually use nodes and try to just do everything I can with staying in a somewhat reasonable budget. I'm not going to blow like 100 bill, but I am open to spending a fair bit. We'll see when we get there. That's about a month away, and I'm pretty excited. I don't know what I'm going to burn. Maybe a Cannon Master, maybe a Dark Knight, maybe something else entirely. And also, you should join my Discord and talk in the Maplestory section. And if you join there, you can also talk to me and request to join my Chronos guild. It's called Wyvern. It's a little baby guild. It's brand new. It's got crit damage at least partially leveled, and it's free to use for anybody. Obviously, it doesn't have nearly as many benefits as most other guilds will, but it is getting there. And if you would like to help that along, I would love to have you in it. Doesn't matter if it's alts or whatever, it is filled with my own alts and friends' alts, and that's totally fine. So thank you to my members and patrons. As always, thank you to you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.